The newly appointed Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, a former wrestling executive and billionaire, addressed department employees about the future direction of the agency amid Donald Trump's push to dismantle it. "My vision aligns with the president's goals to return control of education to the states and give all parents the ability to select quality educational options for their children," McMahon, co-founder of World Wrestling Entertainment, wrote in her message. She described the department's work as a final, unforgettable public service for generations of students. The communication comes as reports suggest Trump is preparing an executive order to dissolve the U.S. Department of Education, which has been in place for 45 years, and reassign its functions, encouraging Republican states to indoctrinate children with a far-right Christian nationalist curriculum that excludes America's checkered history. Employees within the department interpreted McMahon's message as a move toward privatization that could harm students from low-income backgrounds and those with disabilities. One anonymous staff member described the letter as manipulative and expressed concerns that the administration's agenda would pressure states to adopt its educational ideology by threatening funding. "This letter doesn't signal the end of the department," the employees said. "It suggests a shift towards using the agency as a tool to enforce the president's policies at the expense of vulnerable students." Another employee voiced frustration over the recent changes, stating that morale had reached an all-time low. After reading McMahon's email and Elon Musk's message asking federal workers to list 5 things they'd done that day in order to keep their jobs, it's clear that the people in charge are billionaires with little understanding of how to improve education outcomes for American students, the employee remarked. Staff members fear the push for privatization will disproportionately affect disadvantaged students. They argue that private schools are less likely to accommodate children with disabilities and that reducing public funding will widen educational inequities. A third employee described McMahon's message as hostile and indicative of plans to dismantle the department. McMahon emphasized that future actions would involve Congress and other federal agencies and outlined 3 guiding principles: empowering parents as primary decision-makers, eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in schools, and aligning higher education with workforce demands. The email mentioned the word final 3 times in its closing sentences, one employee pointed out. "Our secretary is leading us on a mission to dismantle the very institution meant to ensure educational equity. Without federal oversight, local funding disparities will leave many students behind." Donald Trump signed an executive order in January that aims to steer large amounts of federal money away from public schools and towards private school vouchers and other educational alternatives. The executive order sidesteps Congress and directs the Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to find ways to take existing money that goes into public schools and childcare providers and non-profits and give it to families to use at private Christian schools or for homeschooling expenses. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court has weakened regulations on the discharge of raw sewage into water supplies in a 5-4 decision that undermines the 1972 Clean Water Act. The CWA is the primary federal law governing pollution control and water quality in the nation's waterways. On Tuesday, the court's conservative majority ruled that the Environmental Protection Agency cannot enforce broad, water body-focused pollution discharge limits on Clean Water Act permit holders and must instead establish specific limitations for each permittee. The decision favors San Francisco, which contested the EPA's use of generalized or narrative wastewater permits designed to protect surface water sources, including rivers and streams, used for drinking water. Justice Samuel Alito, writing for the majority, stated that the EPA cannot require permit holders to meet overall water quality standards through what the court termed end-result permits. He argued the agency already possessed adequate tools to gather necessary information from permittees without relying on these broad requirements. Alito was obviously joined by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch, who concurred with parts of the opinion. The EPA had issued San Francisco a permit to discharge pollutants from its combined sewer system into the Pacific Ocean. This permit included conditions to prevent discharges that would violate water quality standards and contained general prohibitions on actions impacting water quality. These conditions were part of the EPA's broader effort to curb San Francisco's discharge of raw sewage during rainstorms. In a dissenting opinion, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, joined by Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Eleanor Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, argued that the Clean Water Act clearly authorizes the EPA to impose any stricter limitations needed to meet or implement water quality standards. Almost half of the tap water in the United States is contaminated with chemicals known as forever chemicals, according to a study from the U.S. Geological Survey. The number of people drinking contaminated water may be even higher than what the study found. There are more than 12,000 types of PFAS chemicals, according to the National Institutes of Health. They are a family of ubiquitous synthetic chemicals that linger in the environment and the human body. PFAS exposure is linked to problems such as cancer, obesity, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, decreased fertility, liver damage, and hormone suppression, according to the EPA. And this week, Donald Trump has issued an executive order to increase logging across 280 million acres of national forests and public lands, bypassing regulations meant to protect endangered species. This directive raises concerns that some of the most ecologically valuable forests in the United States could face large-scale deforestation. The order argues that heavy-handed federal policies have increased U.S. reliance on foreign timber imports and calls for reversing these policies to bolster national and economic security. Trump has instructed the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to raise logging targets and to use unspecified emergency powers to circumvent the Endangered Species Act, which protects the habitats of vulnerable species. This action mirrors Trump's recent efforts to expedite fossil fuel projects through a rarely used committee, even when these projects threaten at-risk species. The executive order also accelerates logging projects under the pretense of reducing wildfire risks by thinning vegetation. However, several scientists argue that extensive logging, especially of mature, fire-resistant trees, can exacerbate wildfire risks by altering the forest microclimate to make conditions hotter and drier. Environmental advocates have condemned the order as a direct attack on protections for approximately 400 species living in national forests, including grizzly bears, spotted owls, and wild salmon. They also caution that increased logging could contaminate water sources relied on by millions of Americans. The future of America's old-growth forests, which play a critical role in absorbing carbon dioxide and mitigating climate change, now hangs in the balance. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. pledged to protect these ancient ecosystems and committed to ending deforestation by 2030. Trump's executive order marks a sharp departure from these environmental commitments. As the climate crisis rages and the world storms past the Paris climate caps that were set to keep the world safe. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.